Hello there, this is Lucy Farron CZT, and this is my second week roundup of the periodic table of tangles that I'm creating for the 100-day project. So here are all the tiles that I've done so far, and I'm going to quickly chat through the ones I created in week 2, and then we can have a look at the ones I'm creating today. So from day 8, the first set that I did were these 3. So we got isocore, I think that's how you say it, I'm not sure, I haven't heard it said, striping and bunzo. So my thoughts behind this were sort of continuing on the tangles that are made using only the C curve. And isocore's unusual, a little bit unusual, in that it needs a string to support it. So you need to put down a string first in pencil, and then it's literally a kind of a wiggly string that crosses over and creates different sections, and then it's a case of filling those sections with C's, just auraing in different directions for each section so they don't kind of all join together. So that's isocore, and then from there I jumped to striping because it's basically the same thing with striping, other than the fact that you are colouring in, maybe your auras need to be slightly wider, and you're colouring in each other one to give the stripes. From striping, I then kind of led me to bunzo, and all 3 of these are just made with a C curve once you're drawing. Striping, again, it needs that string there if you're kind of doing a monotangle, or you can just stripe one little section of your Zentangle drawing. Bunzo, striping to bunzo kind of makes sense. They're quite similar looking in terms of their stripes. They're both made with the C curves. So that was my thinking on day 8. Day 9, I jumped back to the S curves, auras, S curves. So we've got Diva Dance, which is just that S, that wavy S shape, with the addition of the weighted inky blobs there, just weighting the line a little bit in place, and then kind of changes the S curve each time slightly. There's also Mist, which is your S curve aurad with some dots, and I finished off with Nipper, which is your S curve aurad, but you start with a few orbs in place first, and then your first S curve kind of goes between, it kind of weaves between the orbs, and then you just aura. So that was those 3. That was day 9. Day 10, I jumped kind of back to the fescue type tangles, and the first one I did was Flu. So Flu is just literally like fescue, but with an aura. So it can go anywhere it likes. There's no kind of set thing. It's a bit like fescue. You can just put it anywhere. From Flu, there are a few other fescue type or Flu type tangles that use this kind of fescue with an aura, similar kind of motif. So we've got Gust, which is a little like Flu, but when you're creating the initial line, you've got a little curve in it, so it gets kind of like an E shape. So and that can go anywhere. Again, sometimes people draw it in a certain way, but I think it's a go anywhere tangle. And then there's Evoke, which is very similar in its little Flu type shapes, but this is much more kind of prescriptive in the way you set it out. So you've got like a stem with a few coming off, and then you've got another stem and they come off in the other direction. They kind of interweave a little bit, not quite, but they nestle in next to each other. So the way that's put together, even though you are just drawing those little lines with the auras, it's a bit more regimented, I suppose. And then finishing off, I did 4 that day because there was one that I kind of needed to do to finish off this series, and that's Jude. And that again is those shapes, and they kind of alternate. one and then the other, and they all get auras and they all join up, and then you can aura in between as well. So all of those four seem to fit nicely together. So this is the simplest one really. It's a simple line and it goes anywhere. And yeah, Gust has a slightly more complex line, and then Evoke and Dude have the way you draw them is a bit more complex and a bit more prescribed than the other two. Right, day 11. Day 11, I went back to Grid Tangles, and we're over here with Chillon and Bales and Warble. Now, Chillon is kind of the starting grid tangle here, because you've got to draw Chillon before you can draw Bales, and you've got to draw Chillon before you can draw Warble. So it kind of splits in different ways. So we're taking the ordinary grid, the straightish lines, making the grid, and then we're just adding C curves. And Chillon gets them on 2 sides of the little box, and Bales gets them on all 4 sides. And then you can, this is just basic Bales, you can add to that. And then instead of doing what you would do to make Bales for Warble, you're colouring in those C shapes and you're auraing. So that's kind of reminiscent of a bit of Crescent Moon there. That's why that's kind of sitting next to Crescent Moon at the moment, although there are some more grid tangles that are even a bit more like Crescent Moon, so we'll come to those. All these positions here are not set in stone at all. It's just how I've got it laid out at the moment. There are some kind of links here and there, but yeah, this is certainly not final positions. Right, day 12. Day 12, I started my exploration of spirals. There's quite a few spiral tangles. So the first day we had Scoodle, which is basically the mother of Printemps. So Scoodle was kind of came before Printemps, and it developed into Printemps. But I think they both warrant a tile. I don't want to leave Scoodle out just because it kind of evolved and became Printemps. Then we've got, and on that day I also did Ibex down here, which is a little bit, similar kind of spirals, but it's a bit more prescribed in the way they go together. So I haven't really drawn that, but that was a really interesting one. I really liked it. So Scoodle is like an S-shaped spiral, that you create the spiral and then go back on itself to create the other spiral. So that's its motif, the S-shaped spiral. Whereas Printemps is just a single spiral that kind of finishes. The interesting thing about Printemps is that so far it's the only, apart from the beginning of Scoodle, it's the only spiral that you create from the middle outwards. And I guess that's why it's important that it has the kind of the overlap, the drawing behind element, which doesn't occur in any of the other spiral tangles. Because if you're starting in the middle, you're not going to know where the end of your spiral is. So yeah, that's why the spirals on Printemps kind of tuck behind each other, whereas the others kind of nestle and kind of rest up against each other, or they might have an aura's width. So yeah, Printemps is a little bit unusual in that regard. So back on the Ibex, you've got you start with like an S-shape spiral, and then you add some other spirals on in a kind of a, you get this kind of not 3 spirals, there's 6 in the end, 6 spiral motif in Ibex, and then you can add more. But yeah, that was really nice. I've hardly drawn that one before. Where are we up to? Day 13. Day 13, carrying on with spirals. We've got Courant, I'm not sure that's how you say it, Courant, maybe, which is a little bit like your striping in your isocore over here, in that you need to kind of create a string line. It's done in pen, but you create a line for which your spirals then sit in, so it's overlapping crossing line, and then you spiral inside each of those sections. So you're spiraling from the outside. Again with cogwheel you create a kind of a wibbly wobbly shape, a little bit like Pangea, to be honest, a new tangle. And then you're spiraling in and in and in to the middle, auraing in. A spiral is just like a continuous aura. And then you can fit other cogwheels kind of nestled into there. That's why it reminds me of Pangea, because they're all kind of all auras width apart. And the final one on that day was Kula. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it, but I've never heard it said. And this is an interesting one in that it kind of morphs. It doesn't start with a spiral. You start with like a little kind of enclosed C shape. And then you get these nestling spirals that are reminiscent of a kind of a tortoise's shell or a turtle's shell. They kind of feel a little bit like that. They're kind of nestle into each other. They kind of sit into each other. So a little bit like Printemps or Scoodle, but yeah, again, spiraling from the outside in. So that was day 13, and that is where I'm up to at the moment. We're on day 14 today. So join me in a minute in a slightly different location, because I don't want to disturb this, for today's tiles. And today I'm drawing 4 tangles, just because I didn't want to leave one out. I'm kind of finishing off the spirals with Snail, Tortuga, Bler and Immingle. Now you can see I've already set up the grids for Tortuga and Immingle because they are grid tangles. Bler and Immingle are slightly different in their spirals, have straight edges, so it's like a square or a rectangular shaped spiral, which I think might be called a fret. So it's slightly different than the others, but I kind of felt that they went with them. Very similar. Snail and Bler are both border tangles. They just grow in one kind of direction rather than the grids, which kind of grow in both directions. You get repeated in both directions. These are kind of the first kind of border tangles I'm looking at. There's lots of border tangles coming up, so we might start investigating those soon. I'm going to start with Snail, and Snail is kind of Printemps type spirals, but going from the outside in, and we do them in a line. Okay, so we're going to start down here. I think we'll go up here. I'm going to start down here, and then the next one will build onto there. So whatever way you like spiralling round, really. Is that all right? Clockwise or anti-clockwise, maybe? It's up to you. Whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm going to start with a spiral. A bit like Printemps. And then the next one kind of comes off of there. And as you come round, it kind of nestles against the one that you've just drawn. So bringing your line round to make another one. And then you continue in this way. Well, for as long as you like, really, till you run out of space. And kind of a straight line, or you could curve it round if you wanted to. Borders can go wherever you want them to. And just kind of growing in one direction. Make mine come around a little bit, just to finish it off. And that's basically it, apart from then it usually gets some little bits of ink in these little gaps here. So we put a little aura in and then close it off and ink it in. And do that on both sides. So there's some little C curves there to go with our, well, I suppose a spiral is a big C curve, isn't it? Because you just keep going round and round rather than finishing it off, because you're making a spiral rather than an orb when you're going round. An orb is definitely a closed shape. So I think a spiral is like a modified C curve. on both sides. Just a little nice little detail. I suppose it's need to add this bit, but I guess snail is called snail because it looks like a snail shell. Lots of snail shells all next to each other. Appropriate for my bijou tile. And then once you've got those little bits of ink in place, you can finish it off with an aura, or two if you want. All the way around the edge of those. And the other side. On the step out it gets two auras, but it's up to you, I suppose. Kind of like it like that. Okay, that's snail. So the only other kind of curvy spiral tangle for today is Tortuga, and I think Tortuga, the name, is reminiscent of like a tortoise's shell, so tortoise shell, turtle shell. I'm not quite sure whether it means tortoise or turtle in a different language. It might do. So this one, the spirals fit. You get a spiral in each box, and they kind of, I mean, if you went and did an ordinary spiral, it would kind of get cut off. So you could do it like that. But my interpretation, or I think that's how it's done in the step out, is the spiral kind of squishes a bit, so it kind of fits the edges of the box. So you start off going round, and then you kind of, it just kind of fits in, it kind of squishes into the box rather than kind of carry on round and losing bits at the edges. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't draw it slightly different way. Of course you can. So we're just going to start, in fact it starts with a little dot, a bit like a fescue, and then we start spiralling round. So it kind of fits to the edges of the box. The spiral fits to the edges of the box. And then you just repeat, and you can turn your tile and start them in different orientations, which is quite interesting if you want to. There's no hard and fast rules. Just kind of controlling the spiral so that it kind of squeezes in. Oh gosh, it reminds me of cinnamon. Also must be hungry. Must be lunchtime. Not that I eat cinnamon swirls for lunch. I think there is probably a fragment that's like a bit of printemps in a, that you could put in a grid form. So this is just slightly different, but it is the only other spiral tangle I know that's kind of spirals out from the middle. Oh, and interestingly, in the step out, the where you kind of haven't got quite a full box, you kind of have to squish your spiral into that shape as well. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to squish my spiral kind of to fit with the edge there, if that makes sense. I didn't do very good squishing there. I need to start a little bit further from the edge maybe. Try again. That kind of thing. And then you get a teeny tiny one in there maybe. Little triangle one in here. Yeah, rather than kind of imagining it going off the edge like a kind of a proper grid tangle. That's one way of doing it. You could obviously do it where you're drawing kind of half a spiral instead if you've got half a box. Oh, I didn't do that one quite right. I'm going to make these ones tuck behind because they're going to be far too awkward shapes otherwise. Imagine this one. Oh, and this one I would maybe start there. Oh, I'll do a little one here. Yeah, so sometimes they're not squarish, they're more triangly. It's about fitting them in the box. Right, so that's Tortuga. Again, different from Snail, different from all the other spirals. And then look at Ambler. Now, Ambler, as I say, it's like a square or rectangle type spiral that is a border. It just grows in one direction. So we'll do a bit coming across here, and you can draw more than one of them kind of tucking behind. I think that's what the step out shows, but I'm just going to draw one. I'm going to start and see if I can get a whole one in here. So start, and we're spiraling around but in a squarish type shape. And from the outside in. Like so. And then once you've done one, your next one's going to start just there, kind of auraing that last one. Again, spiraling in. And that's it. So the motif is this little squarish spiral. I think it's called a fret. And it just grows in one direction. Very, very similar to Immingle though, with this motif, just doing something slightly different. So I think I'm going to leave my Ambler like that, just as just one single ribbon, just one single kind of border, because yeah, just now that I'm doing some borders, I I think I'll try and keep them all in the same kind of orientation. Right, so that's Ambler, and the final one we're looking at today is a Mingle, which is very similar to Ambler in that the motif is the same, it just each one fits inside a box of your grid. So off we go. Just auring the edge there to begin. And spiralling round. And spiral around maybe in the same direction each time. I don't know whether it feels like I should be doing the same kind of orientation each time, starting in the same place. It feels right to me, but if you're the type of person that likes to mix it up a bit, you could start each one in a different corner. You could spiral around clockwise or anti-clockwise. I'm going clockwise with these ones. I think usually when I draw my curvy spirals though, I go anti-clockwise. That's interesting. I'm not going to squish them into these funny shapes like in Tortuga. I'm just going to imagine the spirals kind of coming round and cutting off. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you see just a bit of a spiral, it's just auras. It's one single aura, isn't it? Just that auras itself, round and round. So this is like a series of straight lines, getting smaller and smaller to create that box spiral, that fret. Concentrate. Have to do them in a particular order, just however you fancy really. And maybe this may appear as a fragment maybe as well. I suppose if it was a fragment you could rotate and reflect it, give a slightly different look than what we're getting here. I'm not sure I'd be able to tell the difference just by looking, whether it was going one round in one direction or the other direction.